Hello there, people. Welcome back to the garage. Now, we are tinkering with the Honda ST1300 Pan-European. This time, yep, rear brake drag. Now, I have taken apart the rear caliper and got that working. And then I vented the entire system, and we still have brake drag. So that means the next place to look is the secondary master cylinder, which is no longer on the bike. I will show you where it is. It is on the operation table. Now, this thing, there's the caliper. This is fitted to the bike like so, and it pivots like so, pushing this piston. It's a bit of a pain to take this thing apart. So this is fitted onto there and onto the bike. Hang on, there we go. That's how that looks. And then this piston is held in place with a ring that is not supposed to look like that, but that's what mine looked like. So I managed to twist that bastard out of there, and so this thing is now loose. Now, now let me show you something. You see the condition of that? Does that look mint to you? Yeah. That's not good. That's not good. So I'm going to clean this, and hey, we'll see what we'll see we'll see what we find in here. It could be gerbils and all sorts of things. Okay, so I'm trying to get this piston out, and I thought of something that I think, yeah, I need to point out. So first of all, I am not a mechanic. I am not a mechanic. I just tinker with things. Now, I need to tell you something. Always remember, the softest material will always lose, okay? So when you're knocking on things and hammering things, make sure you use something that is softer than the material that you're knocking on, right? So I can't show you this with just one hand because I'm holding a phone, the other one. But if you hold it vertical, right, and then you knock there, that is going to send a shock going that way, slowly wiggling this one out. Just be patient with it. Be patient with it. It's stuck, but it's not that stuck. So just gently knock on the underside there with a hammer, a rubber mallet or something like that, that is softer than this material, so you don't damage that. Just a thought. And 3 knocks later, I got this thing apart. So that's the piston. That's the part that we saw. coming out of there. So that's how that looks. So you have a rubber seal there, and you have a rubber seal there in either end of that. And then you have a spring. All right. So that's how that looks, at least on mine. I'm almost scared to look in there. What are we gonna see? Ooh. It's hard to get it to focus down there, but that looks gunky to me. That's going to need a serious clean. So I'll clean everything up and I'll get back to you. All right, so I've managed to clean all the parts up to some degree. This thing is pitted like hell, but it's decent. And I cleaned this thing up, and I managed to get that clean, which was a lot of work. Now, I think that should do it. Now, I made myself, what would you call it? A honing tool. I just put masking tape on there to get the diameter close to tight. And I wrapped, what is that, 400? 240 sandpaper on there, and just gave it a few twists and swirls, just to get the high points out. Not to be careful though, not to take any, material out really, because you don't want to mess with the diameter down there. But that looks clean to me. So now it's just putting the things back together. Few things. Down in here, we have this little part. To get this part out, what I did was I put my finger on there, and then I added air pressure gently into there. Gently air pressure in there, and then that just pops out. So yeah, I've rinsed it, cleaned it, at least done my best. I tidied up the brake pads. The brake pads look good, so I'm just going to reuse those. And now I'm working on the caliper itself. It looks decent, and I have cleaned up the pistons again with sandpaper, but this is 400 paper, just to get the just to take the high points off of the pistons. Now, putting the pistons back into the caliper, what I've done is I've taken a cap off of a spray can and put the DOT4 brake fluid in there. And what I'm basically just going to do is just dip them in the brake fluid just to lubricate them, and then put them in there. And we'll move on. One quick little side note about this part. make sure that you don't move this nut. Don't mess with that nut. Now, the reason that's important is you can mess this up. You can seriously mess this up. So don't allow that nut to move at all. Don't let that nut move, because that will mess with the length from the bracket to the tip, right? So this becomes either too short or too long, right? And if it's too short or too long, this is not going to function the way you think it should. So just be very careful with that nut. Don't let that nut move. All right. All right. Having put the piston back in there. Now remember, this is basically just an aluminium piston with a rubber seal in either end, and then the spring down at the bottom. So you should be able to push that in there. Now, mine doesn't just come back up, but it's relatively... I used the rubber mallet to get it back out. Let's see if I can actually do that one-handed. So I just... no, that's impossible to do with one hand. But if I just tap it a couple of times, that comes back out. So just be careful when you put it in, because I'll show you. So this is the piston. And as you can see, these rubber seals are open from this side, both of them, right? Oop. It's difficult to show. See? So when you go to put this in, be careful so that this rubber seal doesn't flare out, because you'll break it. So just be gentle with it and be very patient, and you'll get this in. Now, I want this to seal, obviously, but I also want it to move. So I don't know how loosely that is supposed to move back and forth in there, but let's see if I can actually put this back in there if it's clean. Yeah, it's relatively well. My fingers aren't clean, so what I'm basically doing is just dipping it in brake fluid just for lubrication. And that goes in there, like so. And at this point you need to be careful so that you don't damage that upper rubber seal. So just be very gentle, but you have to use some force. I'm using the camera to see, so I actually think I'm going to have to use 2 hands for that. Oh, there it goes. So it's in there. But now that rubber seal, that upper seal, is sort of binding a little bit, so it's very tight. But oh, let's see if we can. Oh Jesus! Jiminy cricket! That's difficult to do with one hand. I'll get it in there, and then I'll just work it loose a little bit. So I have I'm just going to use this and push on that piston. So I've got it so that it is being pushed back up by the spring now, which is sort of the idea. Now that took a lot. I had to work it back and forth like 20,000 times, and then I had to take it back out and actually had to sand it down a little bit, very gently. And I had to take off a little bit of material in here, but very, very, very little. Not enough to, basically just cleaning with sandpaper. Fine grit, 240 and 400. And so that's relatively moving loosely down there now. At least enough for the spring to push it back up. So I'm just going to keep working this until it's a little bit looser than that even. And well, I've been looking and I don't have another one of these, so I'm going to have to buy one. And so yeah, it's not coming back together today, but I'll put it back together, fit it back on the bike, and we'll see. So the next day, actually, I've put this thing back together again, and that's the action on it. So the spring is now pushing that piston back out with quite a bit of force. I put copper grease in there, so don't worry about that. So that's the action on it. When it works, noise. Just gotta clean it up. All right, so the bracket and the caliper are back together again. I have some copper grease floating out somewhere, a little bit here and a little bit there. I'll clean that up. But yeah, so I put some pieces of wood between the brake pads to yeah, just for the bleeding of the system. So back on the bike it goes. So the next step is to take a look at the right hand side front caliper, and this was sticking. It was binding on the brake disc pretty severely, actually, a lot more than I thought. So when you take this off the bike, be careful with the ABS sensor. It's fitted to the same bracket as the caliper. So just be careful with that. 2 8mm bolts. Alright, let's do this one. So a quick little tip. For these 3 bolts that hold these two together, I would suggest that you loosen these 3 bolts before you take the caliper off the bike, because these are fitted with thread locker. So either that or an impact driver or just a big hammer. Just I strongly suggest that you loosen those before you take the bracket off the bike. Now, when it comes to taking these pistons out, so you have these two pistons on that hole and the center piston on that hole. And what I suggest, if these pistons are stuck or whatever, use a relatively decent clamp just to hold one of the pistons in place while you add air pressure in there to loosen that one. And then once you got that moving on air pressure, then you can move the clamp over to that one and do the same with that, and then just hold your hand over it and just add air pressure until they pop out. Be a little careful though, don't just go hog wild with it, because these will come flying. So hold your hand over it, or maybe a soft towel or something, because those pistons will come flying out. And do the same with that one, but that one, the center piston works alone on that hole there. So just add air pressure there, and that piston will come out. All right. And once you've gotten the pistons out, you just polish them down so that you get all the marks, anything that might bind off of there. I use 400 grit sandpaper, and don't go up and down on them, because you don't want scuff marks going that way, like that one you see there. That's not big enough to be an issue, but you don't want marks going that way in general. Go across. And yeah. Onwards. And we're done. So I had to take the rear caliper off again, because I had to mess something up in there. And for the more, let's say, observant of you, you would have noticed that in the beginning of the video I did this, and it would barely spin around, even though the front caliper was off, which means there was something wrong with it. And indeed there was. I had managed to mess up some the spring up here that holds the brake pads. I managed to mess that up somehow. Don't exactly know how, but it's good now. And this is the drag that I have. So it's just putting this caliper back on, and we should be good to go. I have bled the system entirely, and it seems I have brakes. So that's that. On to the next thing.